いいかい？世の中にはね、何も切らないことができる剣士がいるんだ。
何も切らないってのは呼吸を知れってことなのか。それが鋼鉄音を切る力。
貴様、一体何をした？
How is it going? I am Slamy the Hope. Welcome to my video explaining swordsmanship in One Piece. Why have I created this video? Well, there are a few reasons. Firstly, the Western English-speaking One Piece community, or more specifically, the One Piece power scaling community, cannot understand swordsmanship at all. Why? They choose not to understand swordsmanship for agenda reasons and agenda purposes, or at a basic comprehension level, they struggle to understand even the surface level of the story. Not helped by the YouTubers and prevalent content creators within the community either starting these agendas or further pushing these poor interpretations of swordsmanship. So I am here today to clear up all misconceptions. I am going to give you an explanation of swordsmanship that is derived directly from the source material. This video is a subsection and precursor of a full-depth analysis of the entirety of swordsmanship within One Piece. If this video is well received, I will go on to complete that behemoth of a project. Without further ado, without wasting any more time, let us begin. Before we explain swordsmanship, take into consideration the current strength level of Zoro, the current strength level of Mihawk, the significance of Mihawk's title, and the significance of Zoro's dream. Take into consideration how stronger Zoro is going to become from now until the end of the story. If any of these things are low or insignificant on your spectrum, I suggest you go back to the drawing board. Most of all, take into consideration the source material. You must accept that Oda has given us a criteria to understand swordsmanship within the story. This is an 1,000+ chapter manga. It would be ludicrous to assume that the base level of the dream of the second most popular character in the story, second most prominent character in the story, was undecipherable in not only the source material, but in the supplementary material. So yes, Oda has given us a criteria for swordsmanship. No need for personal interpretations that are outside of the source material, and no need for obscure interpretations like true swordsman, half swordsman, or following some sort of quote-unquote sword code. You must simply read between the lines and read the subtext. To simply reiterate, number 1, Oda has given us a criteria for identifying a swordsman, and number 2, your own interpretations, if they are not derived from the source material, they are not valid. We know that every sword wielder in One Piece is not a swordsman, but do not misconstrue Oda's words. Without any further abruptions, let us begin. Let us analyze swordsmen in One Piece in order to understand swordsmanship better overall in One Piece. So, let us look at Kaku of CP9, now of CP0. Kaku is a character that arguably has the widest range of abilities in the series. Kaku has all the Rokushiki techniques, which are Ryankyaku, Shigan, Kami-e, Soru Geppo, and Tekai, along with variations of these techniques, and he has the Giraffe Devil Fruit. Kaku not only has the Uchi Uchi no Mi model giraffe, he also has awakened his Devil Fruit. In the Vivre cards, he's also confirmed to have Observation and Armament Haki. He has developed a fighting style that arguably rivals or surpasses the likes of Luffy. He has developed a fighting style that requires no external weapons. Despite all of this, Kaku still refers himself or describes himself as a swordsman. Kaku's signature fighting style is his Yonto-ryu, which is his 4-sword style. 2 swords in each hand, and the use of Ryankyaku with his legs. Yes, the Rokushiki technique. His legs qualify as swords. Zoro affirms that Kaku is a swordsman, and he affirms that Kaku uses force throw style, including his legs, without batting an eye. There are many implications from this exchange of dialogue, but let us highlight two. Having a plethora of abilities in your arsenal, being a weapon yourself, does not preclude you from swordsmanship. Having other abilities outside of your swordsmanship does not stop you being a swordsman. X isn't a swordsman because of this. Y isn't a swordsman because of that. Everybody has ignored the one character in the story who has used swords and has explicitly stated that they are not a swordsman. Baroque Works' Mr. One, Das Bones. Now you may retort with the claim that Das Bones' limbs are blades and not swords. However, the dialogue between Mr. One and Zoro show that this is not the case, or at the very minimum, Zoro was fighting Mr. One as though he was a swordsman. Later on in the Egghead Island arc, we see S-Hawk, which is Mihawk's literal clone, use this same Devil Fruit ability as part of his swordsmanship. So yes, Mr. One's abilities can be used in swordsmanship, but Mr. One clearly is not a swordsman. So why is he not a swordsman? It's not because he has a Devil Fruit, and it's not because he has other abilities. To quote Mr. One, by the way, you should not mistakenly think of me as a swordsman. I've got plenty of other abilities to cut your body to shreds. Mr. One may be saying he is not a swordsman because he's an assassin and or because he has a variety of weapons. But as Kaku would later point out and later establish, having a plethora of abilities in your arsenal, being a weapon yourself, does not stop you being a swordsman. After all, Kaku uses his legs as obviously swords, he uses his fingers as well as his nose as a pistol, uses his body as a shield, uses his neck as a whip, etc., etc. Furthermore, by process of Kaku being in CP9, which was the assassin group of the Cyberpol agents, Kaku also is an assassin. Those two things don't stop him being a swordsman. So if the reason why Mr. One is not a swordsman isn't because he's an assassin, and isn't because he has a variety of weapons outside of his swordsmanship or outside of his potential swordsmanship, why isn't he a swordsman? Well, it is his next words to Zoro before he cuts him with the buzzsaws that make it clear as to why he's not a swordsman. To quote him, I wouldn't even make for a good miner, since I'd cut through everything without restraints. Mr. One may be talking about swordsmanship in addition to mining, but it doesn't matter. This quote gives us his philosophy and methodology on how he uses his devil fruits. Mr. One precludes himself from finesse or delicacy, because this man cuts indiscriminately. He cuts without regard until nothing is left. A chapter prior, we get this quote from Koshiro, who is Zoro's sensei. Quotes, the strongest blade is a sword that can protect what it wishes to protect and cut what it wishes to cut. In my opinion, a blade that cuts whatever it touches cannot be considered a sword. Regardless of what you personally think about Mihawk, whether he is a fraud, he's a coward, this, that, or the third, he has the title as the strongest swordsman in the world. If you have any respect for that title, even at a base level, then you must admit that Mihawk knows exactly what he is talking about regarding swordsmanship. Since Mihawk is the strongest swordsman in the world, we can take what he has to say on swordsmanship with the utmost absolute certainty. What is the very first thing Mihawk says in the entire series? Chapter 51, his very first words to Zoro. Mind you, the context of his words was Zoro was astounded by his subtlety in the swordsmanship. To quote Mihawk, a sword without subtlety is nothing but an iron bar. A lot of people don't like using that translation because it's not a one-to-one translation, and the fact that Viz in the past, pre-timeskip, were notorious for having poor translations. But that's okay. Even if you use other translations, be it fan translations or Stephen Paul's translations, all of the translations have the same interpretation in which we will derive to. Mihawk is basically saying a simplified version of what Koshiro already stated. A sword without delicacy, a sword without subtlety, a sword without proficiency, a sword without softness, A sword without all of these is no real sword. It has no strength, is nothing but an iron bar, is no strong sword. These two quotes from both Koshiro and Mihawk, two masters of the blade and the two teachers of Zoro, the most prominent swordsman figure in the story, and through whose eyes we learn swordsmanship. From these two quotes, given the validity of these quotes, because these two people taught Zoro swordsmanship, the future strongest swordsman in the world, and potentially of all time, we can use these two quotes to create a criteria for what disqualifies or qualifies somebody as a swordsman. What is this criteria? If your sword cannot discern between what to cut and what not to cut, or in other words, your sword cuts everything it touches in its path, that being a sword that has no subtlety, no softness, then you are not a swordsman, because such a sword cannot be considered a sword. It is nothing but an iron bar. It has zero strength. Again, Dasbones professed himself that he cuts everything in his path. Therefore, he is not a swordsman, not according to Koshiro and Mihawk. What is this criteria simplified, or in layman's terms? Swinging your sword like a brute, like a ruffian, like Luffy, would mean your sword isn't a sword as long as it's in your hands. Who do we know that falls short of swordsmanship based on this criteria? Who do we know in the series that thrashes their sword about without subtlety and indiscriminately cuts whatever they touch with their sword? Are you pondering what I am pondering? No, not Shanks. No, not King. Big Mom, the literal antithesis of One Piece's established criteria on swordsmanship. Every single instance we have seen in the series of Big Mom using her sword, she is completely and utterly pulverizing everything in the wake of her attacks, leaving wanton destruction, annihilation, and a sign that there was nothing there to begin with. Simply put, she shows no subtlety, shows no delicacy, and destroys everything without regard for life. That is not swordsmanship according to Koshiro and according to Mihawk. Therefore, she would not be a swordsman or swordswoman. Now you may retort with the fact that in the Vivre cards, it is stated that Big Mom has mastered Ikoku, the swordsmanship of the giants. But take what I am about to say into consideration. When is the first time we've ever seen the swordsmanship of the giants used? In Little Garden with Dory and Brogy. They have also used it again in the series when dismantling of the Kid Pirates. But let us focus more on when they used it in Little Garden to establish the context of why they used it. The reason they used it was because they had to dispatch of the Island Eater. The reason why they needed to dispatch of the Island Eater was because the Island Eater was the reason Little Garden was so dangerous. It wasn't so dangerous to come onto the island, but it was very dangerous to leave the island. Without dispatching of this Island Eater, it would be nearly impossible for any sailor to leave that island. Dory and Brogy profess to the Straw Hats to trust in them and they will lead the way. They will save them. And so Luffy, being the captain, trusted in them. But what happened? The Island Eater swallowed the Going Merry whole along with the Straw Hats. Then, Dory and Brogy used Hakoku. Not Ikoku, Hakoku. I'm assuming it was named Hakoku instead of Ikoku due to the nature of the attack being a combined attack rather than a singular attack, but it does not matter. What happens? They cut through the Island Eater, but the thing is, they also cut in the path of the Straw Hats, but the Straw Hats are not hurt at all. Neither the Straw Hats nor the Going Merry receive any form of damage. They are safe. In this moment, Dory and Brogy were able to cut only what they intended to cut. Swap out Dory and Brogy in this scenario with Big Mom. What would happen? If she swung her sword, either the Island Eater would be completely and utterly annihilated and turned to atoms, leaving nothing in the wake of her attack, or she pulverizes through the Island Eater, but the Straw Hats and the Going Merry are caught in the aftermath of the attack and they are reduced to atoms. That is not swordsmanship. The depths of swordsmanship is far beyond that. It takes true strength and true skill, of course, subsequently, to be able to only cut what you intend to cut. That is why Big Mom is not a swordsman. In any other series, she would be, but Oda has been very specific on the criteria of swordsmanship in One Piece. Again, if your sword cannot cut what it wishes to cut and destroys everything in the wake of its path, you are not using subtlety in your swordsmanship. Therefore, you are not a swordsman, because such a sword cannot be considered a sword. I realize that this definition of swordsmanship seems more inclusive than exclusive, but the best and most irrefutable example of this criteria being true is Zoro's first swordsman opponent in the series, Kabaji of the Buggy Pirates. Kabaji, when he was fighting Zoro, used fire breath, threw kicks, used smoke screens, and threw spinning tops. To put into perspective the skills outside of swordsmanship that Kabaji displayed, this man used an elemental breath attack in battle. If we scale this up, it would be no different to how Yamato and Kaido used their Boro breaths, respectively, in Wano, or in a fight to the death. They obscured their opponent's vision by throwing projectiles, uses a vehicle in battle, and also throws kicks, or in other words, uses martial arts. If you have any doubt that Kabaji is a swordsman, here you go. He not only calls himself a swordsman, but Zoro acknowledges him as a swordsman. From chapter 16, when the story was still at risk of being cancelled, Oda established that no skills outside of your swordsmanship can stop you from being a swordsman. Likewise, having a devil fruit or using Haki does not stop you being a swordsman. There are several swordsmen in this series canonical that have both of these. Take these three characters into consideration. Diamante of the Don Quixote family. His strongest attack was a large flying sword slash that cut the landscape apart. When fighting Kiros, he made it specific that his devil fruit, though giving him evasive properties, wasn't his true strength, and his true strength came from his quote-unquote sword skill. He not only threw projectiles, but he also used a gun. He's confirmed in Refit cards to have both observation and armament Haki. It is clear that Diamante, despite having other abilities in his arsenal, especially a goddamn gun, he's still a swordsman. Law. Now, Law, funnily enough, was trained in swordsmanship by Diamante, who we have just now established is a swordsman. Law was able to use his sword to deflect Doflamingo strings unaided by his devil fruit. He was also able to use his sword to block overheat, an attack Doflamingo used to slice a building in two, and the same ability Doflamingo was going to use on Sanji to kill him. And as we saw on Onigashima, Law was very capable of using sword techniques outside of his devil fruit. Law is an exemplar swordsman, one of the strongest swordsmen in the world. His swordsmanship may not revolve in Haki, but he is clearly one of the strongest swordsmen in the world. And as for the last character I'm going to mention, is an admiral, Admiral Fujitora. His literal character design is a blind swordsman, and it's based upon a blind swordsman in Japanese film. I don't need to get into what strength Fujitora would need, or how high his Haki needs to be. He's an admiral. But he's outright stated in the volumes in the data books to be a swordsman. Once again, Oda has established that there is no skill, ability, Haki, devil fruit, or otherwise outside of your swordsmanship that can stop you from being a swordsman. So regardless of the baseless techniques, baseless abilities attributed to Shanks, it will not stop him from being a swordsman. So if it doesn't stop him from being a swordsman, then he is inferior to the strongest swordsman in the world. Shanks is a swordsman. Even if he has a nuke coming out of his elbow, out of the gaping wound from the Sea King, he is still a swordsman. And because he is still a swordsman, because Mihawk is the strongest swordsman, Mihawk is stronger than Shanks. It is literally that simple. But of course, I digress. Let's move on. Let's go to the primary argument that people use against Mihawk. They claim that, Mihawk may be the better swordsman, but because Shanks has stronger Haki and Mihawk is only better in sword skill, Shanks is the stronger combatant. Let's debunk that. This argument is a fundamental mischaracterization of Haki and its demonstrated applications, as well as Mihawk's title. Let us clear up the latter first. Mihawk's title is not the world's most skilled swordsman. Mihawk's title is not the greatest swordsman. Mihawk's title is not the strongest swordsman in a sword fight. Mihawk's title is not the strongest bladed user in the world. Mihawk's title is not the strongest practitioner of swordsmanship. Mihawk's title is none of these arbitrary, agenda-based flanderizations. Some of these things are true, like Mihawk being the strongest in the sword fight, this, that, and the third. However, all of these things are encompassed by his actual title as the strongest swordsman in the world, Sekai Seikyo no Kenshi. It is not anything else but the strongest swordsman in the world. The base level of interpretation of that title is, if you are a swordsman, Mihawk is above you, regardless of what you can do as a swordsman. Because Mihawk is a swordsman, the strongest swordsman, he's stronger than you. It would make no sense for the world's strongest swordsman to be inferior to another swordsman. It doesn't make sense at all, but I digress. If you have any confusion as to what Mihawk's title means, look no further than the other characters who have the world's strongest title in One Piece. Let's specifically look at Whitebeard because he is also a human man. Do we call Whitebeard the world's most skilled man? No. Do we call Whitebeard the strongest man in a man fight? No. Do we say he has the strongest attack power of any man? Do we say he is the greatest man? Some of these things may be true, but no, we don't say any of these things as his title. All of these abilities, all of these considerations, all of these arguments are encompassed by his actual title as the strongest man in the world, Sekai Saikyo no Otoko. Otoko, in the title Strongest Man in the World, specifically refers to human men. So again, Whitebeard is the strongest man in the world, nothing else. This title takes into consideration his mobility, reflexes, attack power, agency, reaction speed, this, that, and the third, and of course, Haki. None of these things are considered separate from Whitebeard's title. When we power scale for every other character, their Haki is considered a fundamental part of not only the strengths, but it's taken into consideration. But when it comes to Mihawk, nobody ever does this. It's strange, but I digress. So, again, Mihawk's title takes into consideration Haki. But putting aside the Mihawk vs. Shanks element when discussing Mihawk's title, let us speak about Haki as it pertains to swordsmanship. Firstly, let us establish what Haki is. Haki is not a standalone combat skill. Haki is a force multiplier. Let me say that again. Haki is not a fundamental combat skill. It is a force multiplier. Haki is akin to Nen in Hunter x Hunter, Ki in Dragon Ball, Chakra in Naruto, etc. Conceptually, they are the same, but of course, when it comes to application, they are different. It is an inner power found in basically every possible combatant, but it takes a true strong individual to be able to tap into said power within themselves. But what is Haki? Every instance we have seen of Haki being used in combat is to enhance already existing abilities. Armament Haki is used to strengthen both defense and attack. Observation Haki is used to be aware, but in terms of combat, it is only used to perceive the opponent's next moves, which most fighters already make an effort towards. Fortunately, we follow 3 characters who are strong in their own right, in fact some of the strongest men in the world, from pre-time skip to post-time skip. And we have seen them grow from knowing zero Haki to now having some of the strongest Haki in the verse. Each of the Straw Hat Crew's monster trio, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji. From pre-time skip to post-time skip, all of them have learned Haki and added it to their skill sets. What has changed about how they fight? Short question, nothing. Nothing has changed from their fighting style pre-time skip to post-time skip. From pre-time skip to post-time skip, Sanji is still kicking people. The difference between how he fights now and how he fought back then was that now he's simply using more power and more awareness. Or in other words, he's using observation Haki and undermine Haki. Zoro from pre-time skip to post-time skip has not changed a damn thing about how he fights. He is still cutting people. Zoro was actually taught the principles of Haki from his sensei Koshiro. You know, the breath of all things, which is an intrinsic Haki skill. So again, no. Nothing has changed from how Zoro fights pre-time skip to post-time skip. He's simply using more Haki and he's being aware. But of all the monster trio, take Luffy the most into consideration. Luffy is one of the only characters confirmed in the entire story to have all forms of advanced Haki. Luffy can use regular observation Haki and he can see into the future. Luffy can use regular armament Haki, can use Ryo, and he has internal destruction. Luffy can use base Conqueror's Haki, Luffy can use Conqueror's Coding. To reiterate, Luffy is one of the only people in this series to use every single advanced form of Haki. How has it changed about how he fights? Not a damn thing. He's still punching, kicking, stretching, and inflating the same way he used to do in pre-time skip. The only difference now is that his strength has multiplied. So again, no, Haki is not a fighting style, it is a force multiplier. Are we supposed to believe that the likes of Shanks have developed Haki so powerful that it completely divorces them from the term swordsman? Since it's a foregone conclusion that Luffy will surpass Shanks, will Luffy stop being a rubber man when he fully develops his Haki, but instead becomes a Haki man who uses rubber? Then again, Luffy has been deemed a sun god now, so maybe that's not helping my argument. But again, no. That's absurd. There is no such thing as Haki man, Haki specialist, this, that, or the third. Haki simply enhances already existing abilities. So no, it's never been established that once your Haki becomes of a certain level, you are no longer a swordsman. So then, how is Haki applied in swordsmanship? Very simple. In terms of observation Haki, well, Mihawk, as the strongest swordsman in the world, is touted to have some of the best observation, if not the greatest observation currently living in the entire One Piece world. Not to mention, the second strongest swordsman in the world, Shanks, has abilities not only to see into the future 10 seconds into the future, but has an ability to completely turn off and negate future sight. It is implied the reason Shanks has these abilities is because he developed them in his legendary duels with Mihawk. How do we know this? Mihawk in the supplementing material and in the story is implied to be one of the best observation Haki users in the entire verse. He can gauge the true strength of anybody without the need to cross blades, as confirmed in his Vivre card as well as in the story. He also was able to gauge and expound upon Luffy's ability to befriend any ally on the seas, claiming it to be, of course, the most terrifying ability on the seas. Mihawk also has been given the epithet Hawkeyes, which implies great ability and perception, but his original epithet was supposed to be clairvoyant or Senringan, which the definition is a supernatural ability to perceive things into the future, which again implies phenomenal observation Haki and especially phenomenal future sight. Given that Mihawk has these abilities, or is implied to have these abilities, it would mean Shanks either needs future sight as great as Mihawk, or an ability to negate future sight in order to compete with Mihawk. And as we can clearly see, he does. To simplify, in order to be a top tier swordsman, your observation haki needs to be of the highest level. After all, Zoro himself attributed the ability of cutting through iron with the ability of knowing the breadth of all things, which is an intrinsic haki skill. The necessity of possessing supreme armament haki as a swordsman does not need to be mentioned. You need regular armament haki in order to protect your swords from any form of damage. You need Ryo in order to create stronger sword slashes and sword attacks. And of course, you need complete mastery over your armament haki in order to forge a black blade. Being able to forge a black blade is, to this day, one of the rarest abilities in the entirety of the series. So of course, the strongest swordsman in the world, Mihawk, is implied to have already done so, and that is why he possesses the strongest blade in the world, a title he himself gave Yoru. And as for Conqueror's Haki, well, Zoro and Wano also received the ability to use advanced Conqueror's Haki. His ambition to be the strongest swordsman in the world was deemed a kingly ambition by King, and of course seconded by Zoro. If your ambition to be the strongest swordsman in the world is deemed a kingly ambition, it is not unreasonable to assume that the current strongest swordsman in the world, or in other words, the king of swordsmen, also possesses the ability of advanced Conqueror's Haki. And by proxy of Mihawk's title as the strongest swordsman in the world, we can infer that Mihawk possesses the strongest advanced Conqueror's Haki on a sword in the world, until Zoro obviously surpasses him. Which again means that Mihawk's swordsmanship enhanced by his Haki, or his Conqueror's Haki applied on a blade, is superior than Shanks' Conqueror's Haki applied on a blade, because Shanks is the second strongest swordsman and Mihawk is the first strongest swordsman, or the world's strongest swordsman. Taking observation haki, armament haki, and of course Conqueror's haki into consideration, do you see now how strong Mihawk is, and how strong Zoro will need to be in order to be the strongest swordsman in the world? No, his title is not based in skill, it is based in strength. The term strongest is literally in the title, and Zoro will need to be one of the strongest men alive in order to defeat Mihawk. So yes, Mihawk's swordsmanship enhanced by his haki is superior to Shanks' swordsmanship enhanced by his haki. Last but not least, take this into consideration. In Kaido's quote-unquote top 5, it consists of Roger, Whitebeard, Roxy Xebec, Oden, and Shanks. Of those 5 characters, 3 of the 5 are confirmed swordsmen, and it potentially could be 4 out of the 5, depending on how we see Rox depicted in battle. At the end of the day, sword lethality, swordsmanship in general, is one of the strongest, if not the single strongest, fighting style in the entire series. Of course, until Luffy becomes the strongest pirate of all time. But yeah, that is all I have to say regarding swordsmanship. Because this video has gone long enough, I won't address sword skill. However, do note that I have touched upon at least 75% of what sword skill entails, or in other words, what Oda is referring to when he's talking about sword skill in One Piece. If this video is well received, and or I get any comments requesting a follow-up video, I will make a follow-up video in which I will address what sword skill really pertains to in One Piece. If anybody has any issues with the explanation of swordsmanship that I have derived from the source material, please do not hesitate to state your opinion in the comments below. After all, this video is an open discussion to create a definition for swordsmanship that we can all use and understand in One Piece, so that we can eliminate all the erroneous arguments, claims, and talking points used to downplay swordsmanship. I've had a lot of fun making this video because I feel that enough is enough. It is time as a community for all of us to stop using our own personal interpretations when there is clearly a basis to derive from in the source material. For too long, we have come to our own conclusions and interpretations regarding swordsmanship without referring to the source material. If I hear a single other person simply use the Google definition of swordsmanship, or say things like, to be a swordsman, you need to follow a swordsman code or an ethical code or whatever, and use that as the basis of swordsmanship, I think it's asinine completely. Use the source material when you're coming to these conclusions, when you're giving your own interpretation. At the end of the day, we can all come to our own interpretations and conclusions. But if your interpretations are not from the source material, then they are weak, and you cannot infer them because we're getting into headcanon territory. If you are coming to a conclusion regarding swordsmanship, use what you have seen in the story. And keep it to statements either in the source material or in supplementary material in which we can infer and apply from, not baseless speculation. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Thank you for listening to my long sort of rant, if you want to call it that. But yeah, this was just a small little video essay as to establish what swordsmanship is in the story. Without further ado, that's me done. Lastly, of course, keep your head up. We are in the final saga of One Piece. It's been lit so far. Enjoy. And like Oda has simply reiterated many, many times in the story, dreams don't end. So keep your head up, keep cool, and enjoy life.